It didn't break per se, but simply disappeared. Jinwoo hurriedly looked at his palm. No steel bar there, just grains of sand. Sand? Jinwoo spat out the sand in his mouth and hurriedly raised his head up. His eyes caught the sight on an endless plain of nothing but sand. Jinwoo frowned heavily and got up. All the sand that found its way inside his clothes poured out. He dusted the sand caked on his chest while taking a look around him. Indeed, all he could see was sand. And more sand. A desert. This couldn't be real. Until a few moments ago, he was sleeping on a bed inside a hospital located in the middle of Seoul. But now, as soon as he opened his eyes, he was in the middle of a massive desert. Jinwoo scooped up a handful of sand and let it slip through his fingers. The fine grains fell straight down to the ground. He was getting a really bad premonition right about now. Sure enough, just as Jinwoo took a step back, the sand within the pit suddenly exploded upwards. The falling sand emitted the roar of a waterfall. Jinwoo's eyes went extra round in the meantime. An insect. The identity of the thing that exploded out from the sand was a giant centipede. When fully revealed, the DMN thing's head almost reached the height equaling that of a 5-story building. Jinwoo anxiously swallowed his saliva. This is unreal. For sure, the beastard was unrealistically huge. He had never heard of a centipede this big existing in the world before. Goal: please survive until the end of the time limit. Time limit: 4 hours. Remaining time: 4 hours 0 minutes 0 seconds. Are you kidding me? However, as soon as the remaining time changed to 3 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds, the centipede parted sand and rushed towards him as if it couldn't wait any longer. What the hell? Jinwoo hurriedly spun around and ran for his life. There was no time to deliberate on things. If he wanted to live, then he had to run. That was the only thought racing in his head. However, even before he had taken several steps, another pillar of sand exploded upwards not too far from his position. Jinwoo fell on his rear from the powerful shockwave. He rolled on the sandy ground before urgently getting back up. He swiped the sand off his face before his eyes shot open even wider. This time, it wasn't just one or two of them. Boom. Before he had even noticed it, there were 7 sand centipedes jutting out from the sand, and they were all glaring at him. As the centipedes issued shrill cries, Jinwoo's complexion changed for the worse. Jinwoo reappeared in the hospital room exactly 4 hours later. Plop. Jinwoo keeled over on the floor and painfully wheezed out. Cough, cough. His mouth felt full with this coarse, grainy taste. His eyes stung badly too, seemingly like sand particles got in there. Jinwoo whimpered and groaned for a long time, before powerlessly falling flat on his back. He didn't have any energy left to lift even a finger. What was that? Jinwoo continued to pant heavily when a new message appeared before him. Jinwoo's expression crumpled into something unsightly. A penalty quest. Did he do something worthy of being punished? Jinwoo carefully retreaded his memories until he recalled that he abandoned midway yesterday. Could it be? Now that he thought about it, it definitely said that if the quest was not completed, he'd be hit with a corresponding penalty. Jinwoo lapped the outer perimeter of the hospital once and arrived back in front of his room. He was currently bent over and panting out heavily. His heart felt like it might explode at any second, but he couldn't give up yet. I worked so crazy hard until now, so no way I would. He somehow managed to open the door and took a step forward. It was finally over. Pant, pant. Jinwoo fell down to his knees. His breath reeked of something sweet and bitter. His face and back were soaked in sweat. Pant, pant. As Jinwoo tried to regulate his heavy, rough breathing while thick sweat drops continuously dripped down, a familiar message popped up in front of his eyes. Jinwoo momentarily thought about forgetting about everything and simply laying down in defeat, but quickly changed his mind. At least for now, he wanted to confirm what these reward things could actually be with his own eyes first. Confirm. Reward 1. Full recovery of the current physical condition. Reward 2. 3 additional stat points. Reward 3. 1 random box. Why are there so many of them? That was the first thought to enter his dazed mind after he took a gander at the contents of his rewards. But when he thought about it a little deeper, one of those rewards seemed rather useful right now. And there was also one that made him curious about what it could actually mean. For now, he urgently needed the first reward available. He was on the brink of collapsing here, since there really was a penalty for failure. The odds of completion rewards being real were pretty DMN high as well. Well, trying wouldn't hurt anyways, right? Seriously, this thing wouldn't throw him back into the penalty zone again after it said it'd give him the rewards, now would it? When Jinwoo shifted his gaze around, he spotted a small box resting on top of the bed as well as his own stat window floating in the air. I guess that thing over there is the random box. The important thing was his stat window, though. This window displayed simple information about himself. What he paid attention to was the skills column. a passive skill called tenacity and an active one called dash. For some reason, he felt rather familiar with them. I remember now. Yesterday, or to be more precise, back in the early dawn of this morning. He remembered hearing those words while being chased around by the centipedes in the penalty zone. It happened probably after 3 hours of him constantly running for his dear life. He was suddenly greeted by a couple of new messages, the daily quest that would continue to show up every day, and the stat points as the reward. As long as this unexplainable phenomenon didn't come to a sudden end, he'd be able to live a completely different life to the one he'd been leading until now. This was an unbelievable opportunity for him. Besides that, the stat window also showed his level. Does this mean I can also increase my level, too? Eventually, though, Jinwoo shook his head. There's no way. Now that would be too good to be true. He wasn't hoping that far, anyway. The rewards from the quests alone were plenty enough for him. It had been a week since he started taking on the daily quests. Several changes took place during this time. One of them happened to be the transformation of his body. He had definitely changed. His body was in the middle of a transformation. I've got muscles now. The most eye-catching change was the drastic increase of his muscles. The normal-looking flabby flesh was gradually disappearing, only to be replaced by hard muscles. Thanks to that, his shoulders had widened more and his overall frame had grown bigger as well. Even then, doesn't seem heavy and slow. Only the necessary amount of muscles in the necessary places. If you were to describe the overall impression his body gave off, then would it be kinda like looking swift and athletic? He was a guy and even he found this rather appealing, so it wasn't such a strange thing for young nurses to whisper about him. And it's all due to this guy over here. However, it is way too eye-catching, isn't it? The number of times he was mentioned by the nurses was constantly on the rise. It was quite likely that, since their job involved looking after human bodies, their levels of discernment could have been higher than most. Jinwoo possessed quite a keen sense of hearing, so whenever his name was mentioned in the vicinity, he took note of it. I guess it's time for me to leave this hospital. It was not good to be the center of attention. Not only would he feel uncomfortable being placed under the spotlight, but he also didn't want to let others know of this strange phenomenon. Didn't the old saying go something like, scratching unnecessarily results in more flakes to clean up, or something like that? He wanted to increase his stat points as quietly as possible, and it shouldn't be a problem for me to leave the hospital now, too. Thankfully, tests had shown that he was normal and healthy, meaning he could leave at any time he wanted. No, hang on a minute, it kinda felt like that both the hospital and the association wanted him to leave in the first place. Well, it'd be a waste to spend that much money as hospital fee on a measly rankie like him. One of the special privileges the S-ranked hunters enjoyed was the government paying for all of their health-related expenses. Of course, that was a story happening in another cosmos as far as Jinwoo was concerned. So, he figured that it wouldn't be such a bad idea to leave this hospital right about now. And there was something he wanted to confirm as well. Now, where did I put it? Jinwoo rummaged around his pockets and brought something out. It was a key gleaming in a golden hue. It featured such a simple design that it could be passed off as an accessory at a casual glance. Type key. A key that transfers you to an instant dungeon. Can be used at the third exit of the Hapjeong subway station. He found this key inside one of the random boxes he got as the daily quest rewards. At first, he wondered why a key would come out from there, but once he saw the rarity category, he immediately realized that this was no ordinary item. This was one of the reasons prompting him to get discharged from the hospital as well. An entrance key to the instant dungeon. Whether it was called instant or not, a dungeon was a dungeon. If it was about dungeons, then he had plenty of painful memories regarding those. I'm sure there will be no problems as long as I just take a quick peek inside. If things looked bad, all he had to do was run away. After all, he'd been running 10 kilometers every day for a while now, so he was pretty confident of running away, actually. And it was his mistake for taking it too lightly. Slam, slam. Is there a wall blocking me? He pounded on the invisible wall and shouted at the outside. But no one replied back. People continued to carry on with their own lives, that was all. Sometimes, someone approached the Hapjeong station, but they simply vanished as soon as coming in contact with this invisible wall. It was quite likely that the place he was in and the outside world were two separate dimensions. Jinwoo tried his hardest to force his way out of this place, which prompted a new alert message to pop up. It was the same message as before. The key in his possession disappeared as soon as he set foot inside the third exit of the subway station. By the time Jinwoo realized things had gone rather awry and hurriedly turned around to leave, it was already too late. He was thinking of finding a hidden gate or some kind of a doorway within the third exit that would transport him to a dungeon. but his expectation was completely off the mark, and quite different from the regular dungeons. He couldn't even leave as he pleased, too. It's different from other dungeons. Jinwoo spat out a long groan and looked behind him. What he could see now was the interior of the subway station that had transformed into a jungle. Walls were thick with twisting vines, and rancid odor akin to rotting corpses assaulted his senses. Hell, he even heard the cries of what sounded like wild beasts from afar every now and then, too. It wasn't that there was a hidden entrance somewhere near the entrance of the Hapjeong station, but the entire station had become a dungeon. Instead, Jinwoo nervously swallowed his saliva and slowly descended the steps. He held his breath and surveyed his surroundings, but he couldn't sense anything particular. However, it was truly forbidden to underestimate the dangers in a dungeon. Among the low-ranked monsters, there were quite a few that knew how to mask and hide their presence very well. No, maybe because they were so low-ranked that they had no choice but to hide and wait to ambush their prey. Past the toilets, he entered deeper and encountered the underground shopping center. Shops were worn down and in complete disarray, looking more like a ruin than anything else. Seeing the human-less ruined shells of the shops dimly illuminated by the flickering overhead lamps, something felt rather ominously creepy and sinister. A few of the lamps continued to flicker as if their life was nearing the end. Everything seemed so quiet and still, but he did sense a gaze of something. And then there was this smell, too. The seriously rotten odor of an animal carcass with flies buzzing around was coming from somewhere. For Jinwoo, who had frequently entered dungeons, this was a rather familiar smell. This smell, an animal-type monster. Jinwoo deliberately turned around and presented his back, and very slowly retread the path he had taken until now. An animal would try pounce on the prey as soon as its back was shown. An animal-type monster would be no different. And so, it happened when he took his third step. Smash! The shop window of a clothing store behind him shattered into pieces and something jumped out. And this something, as soon as it landed on the ground, leapt towards Jinwoo's exposed neck in one go. Roar! It was a huge wolf with a reddish coat of fur. When he took a closer look, its name also appeared on top of its head, just like the centipedes from the penalty zone. Iron Fang Lichen. However, unlike before, its name was in white letters, not red. There is no time to waste here. Two more lichens jumped out from their hiding place from behind the shop's darkness. It was in a pack. Jinwoo's eyes grew wider. They bared their big fangs and closed the distance in an instant. It was at this moment that one of the lichens aimed for his face and leapt up. Jinwoo ducked low. The lichen flew over his head and landed face first on the ground after failing to stop in time. Screw this. Whoosh. Accompanied by a bone-chilling sound of wind parting ways, his fist flew straight forward. Pow! It took just one hit and the head of the lichen simply exploded. The corpse of the now headless lichen slammed into the ceiling above, and then powerlessly fell down to the ground. Thud! Jinwoo's eyes opened up very wide and he stared dumbfoundedly at his own fist. What an unexpected destructive power that was. My level rose up. To make sure that he didn't mishear that, Jinwoo hurriedly accessed his status window. His level really did go up, and when a level went up, a single point was added to all of his stats. As it turned out, it wasn't only the quest rewards that could impact the values of his stats. It was also possible to improve his stats through leveling up, too. To think, I can actually level up. He only carried a vague expectation, but it actually became reality. His movement speed had increased as well. If it was in the past, there was no way he'd be able to lightly evade the all-out attack of an animal, nor could his punch move fast enough to produce the sound of the air splitting apart. Right, the physical strength in my muscles has increased, so obviously my speed would have increased along the way, too. Simply by raising his strength stat higher, both his power and speed had gone up. The battle against the lichens proved this. The lichen that was definitely somewhere nearby had gone with the wind before he had noticed it. Jinwoo hurriedly scanned his surroundings, but he couldn't find a single trace of the creature. Quite likely, it had turned tail and ran away while he was immersed in the status windows. Well, he should have known something was up when it lowered its tail and cautiously studied his mood. Tisk. Jinwoo smacked his lips, realizing that a bundle of experience points had just escaped from his grasp. Hang on, do these things give away things like magic crystals, too? The sudden thought popping up in his head stopped him in his tracks. Monsters appearing within the gates all possessed one, or sometimes several, magic crystals in them. Jinwoo was also a hunter. He was successful in killing these monsters, so not being rewarded for his work kind of felt a bit like he was wronged somehow. Feeling a little rueful, he sliced open the lichen's stomach, but it turned out to be a waste of time. It seemed that these creatures were fundamentally different from the regular monsters. Jinwoo dusted his hands and was about to stand back up. But then, he spotted something glittering within the dead lycan's mouth. So, he opened the creature's maws. One of the lycan's fangs was emitting a beam of light. When Jinwoo reached out, a new message popped up before him. Sure thing. Rarity, none. Type, miscellaneous. A large and sharp canine of a lycan. Can be stored in the inventory or can be sold at the store. Jinwoo got flustered a bit while staring at the canine tooth. There was a store, too. Where would you find a system less friendly than the one he was saddled with? To think, it was designed in such a way that the end user had to personally experience it with his own body before learning about any of its functions. Hell, he wasn't given much of an explanation during the penalty quest and he almost died as a result back then. Jinwoo gnashed his teeth and tried to summon this store thing. Store. He couldn't help but feel his anticipation build up, wondering if a shop with a signboard declaring store and manned by an NPC merchant, kinda like from video games, might really appear before him. With the clanging sounds of coins, his inventory appeared next. Right at the bottom of the display, in the column saying gold, he could see the number 20 appearing there. That space had been empty yesterday. 20 gold, hey. He couldn't really use that money in real life, and he couldn't even use the store properly yet, so he had no idea just how much this 20 gold was actually worth. Oh well, a creature from the Ranky dungeon wouldn't have given me any decent loot to begin with. Even if there was a difference between the dungeons found beyond the gates and this so-called instant dungeon, it would be the same difference at the end of the day. The lycan he thought had ran away actually came back with a bunch of its friends. A wonderfully bright smile bloomed on Jinwoo's face. Even at a casual glance, there must be over 20 of them here. Eureka! Hang on a minute. Was that the right word to use in this sort of situation? Whatever, it was definitely a word to express one's joy anyway. Jinwoo tightly grasped the sword and spoke up. With the exception of your canines, I'm gonna massacre all of you. When the chilling glare of a man who was obsessed about making money landed on the lycans, they became intimidated and shuddered slightly. It was at this point that Jinwoo pounced on them without mercy. As he expected, his levels rose up quite quickly, simply from searching every nook and cranny of the first floor and killing all the lycans he could find. Jinwoo's level shot right up to 7. He had jumped up 5 flights of stairs, in other words. When he caught up and killed the very last monster running desperately away from him, a strange message popped up into his view. A title given to a hunter skilled in hunting wolves. When facing animal-type monsters, all of your stats will increase by 40%. A bonus boost to his stats when fighting against animal-type monsters. Although the effect was a bit restricted, still, having his stats increase by 40%, now that didn't sound too bad at all. There are plenty of animal-type monsters out there, so would this apply to them as well? If that was the case, then he'd be able to easily kill monsters when participating in the future raids. However, he still earned big time even when disregarding his new title. 34 wolf canines, 2 rusted daggers, a set of traveler's clothes, and 1 return crystal. The rusted daggers possessed lower attack power bonus compared to the sword he'd been using until now, and the traveler's clothes were not something he could actually wear, but just some random japtum that he could hawk off to the store. When he sold them all off, he earned just over 1,000 gold. The only thing remaining, besides the gold, was the return crystal. When he was trying desperately to escape from the dungeon back then, the message said he'd need a return crystal if he wanted to leave. And now, if he wanted to, he could escape at any time. He found himself on a crossroads. In front, the stairs leading down to the 2nd floor, and in his hand, a single return crystal grasped tightly. Do I continue on, or do I back out? If it was in the past, he'd not hesitate and choose the latter. That was how he managed to survive all those raids with his pathetic stats. Everyone said that him surviving until now was a miracle, but well, he was trying to be smart about his choices, actually. However, the story was different now. He didn't want to retreat here. He felt that if he turned away to leave now, then he'd never be able to take another step forward in his life. I've retreated enough times already, right? Wouldn't it be okay for him to jump in headlong, at least once in his life? Jinwoo pocketed the return crystal. His steps climbing down the steps to the 2nd floor was light. Unlike the dungeons of the gates, there was a thing called respawn within the instant dungeon. While he was sweeping away every single monster found on the 2nd floor, all the monsters on the 1st respawned. While he went back upstairs to deal with them, monsters on the 2nd floor respawned, so on and so forth. Jinwoo hopped between the 1st and 2nd floor and killed monsters until his level no longer rose up. Who knows when I'll ever run into another opportunity like this one. Along the way, he got so used to this place that he was able to predict from where and how the monsters would try to attack him. A monkey falling from the ceiling. He lightly evaded the claws of the monkey-type monster falling from the ceiling and stabbed it in the chest with his sword. And then, one cat each from left and right. And then, he orderly sliced the necks of the Black Panther-like creatures jumping at him from his sides. And with these three, he had arrived at the end of the second floor. He had cleared out the second floor once more. However, his level hadn't been moving from 15 for a long time now. It seemed that reaching that high was the limit for the first 2 floors. Stats: Strength 45, Stamina 24, Agility 24, Intelligence 24, Perception 24. With him being level 15, his stats had risen up by quite a lot. His agility was now almost at 25. He finally got to feel the difference between the agility and the strength stat when the former hit the value of 20. What should I do now? He was looking at the stairs leading down to the 3rd floor. There was a reason why he continued to hunt in the first 2 floors even though there was a way to go even lower. It's giving me the creeps. With his perception stat so much higher, he could sense the aura of something ominous lurking down there far better than before. Without a doubt, something really strong was hiding somewhere down below. He didn't have to see it to know. Jinwoo recalled the message he saw back by the entrance of this instant dungeon. The existence of the boss. Jinwoo had been roaming the first 2 floors in order to raise his levels until he couldn't anymore, all for the purpose of fighting this boss. He had prepared himself as much as he could, but when the time to actually go down there came, he was getting all sweaty and nervous. Jinwoo lightly slapped both of his cheeks. I mean, I've entered a dungeon, so I can't just leave without taking a look at what this boss looks like, now can I? Jinwoo gripped the sword tightly with both of his hands, slowly descended the steps. Could he have been mistaken when the steps felt unusually longer than before? He swallowed dried saliva down. The lighting was worse than the first 2 floors, but there was no problem with seeing where he was going. Is it because of my perception stat? He couldn't help but feel that his eyesight had improved greatly. He cautiously climbed lower until eventually spotting the railway tunnel used by the subway trains. No, he saw where the railway used to be. The tunnel that should have been used by trains was now filled with jet black liquid. Instead, what is this? Rather than a subway tunnel, it was more like a lake or a river now. Just as Jinwoo took one more step forward to take a closer look, a long log-like object shot out from the surface of the black water. Swish, it's fast. The thing that arrived in front of his nose in the blink of an eye was not a log, but a snake with the thickness rivaling one. Actually, taken by surprise, Jinwoo could only swing the sword and strike the head of the snake away from him. Clang! Jinwoo's eyes opened wider. What the hell? He did succeed in deviating that direction of the lunging snake, but his trusty steel longsword ended up breaking apart from the impact. Jinwoo looked back in surprise. The snake must have been surprised by his counterattack as well, because it didn't try to follow up right away, but instead chose to simply glare at him while coiling itself up a distance away. The ruler of the swamp, Poison Fang Blue Kasaka. Jinwoo could clearly see the orange-colored name of the monster. It was a creature incomparably faster and hardier than those with their names written in white. Even then, for a sword reinforced with magic energy to break like that. Jinwoo swallowed nervously and cautiously studied the boss monster called Kasaka. Blue scales covering its entire body gleamed in an oily manner. As if it had draped itself with thick armor, those scales had no gaps to speak of. Sword strikes wouldn't have worked in the first place. It'd be the same story for punches, too. When Jinwoo's thoughts arrived there, the Kasaka must have finished its own analysis on its prey, because it finally lunged at him once more. No matter how one looked at it, it was a frightening turn of speed, that's for sure. Jinwoo narrowed his eyes. It's coming. When he concentrated hard, he could now clearly see the attack of the Kasaka, which was something he couldn't even properly decipher in the beginning. This was all due to the increased agility stat. Just before the Kasaka opened its maws wide and tried to swallow him, Jinwoo swiftly sidestepped and let the attack brush past him. At the same time, he wrapped his arms around the creature and caught it in a headlock. He then tightened his grip. Jinwoo's strength stat was almost at 50. An unbelievably powerful pressure tightened around the snake's main artery. The snake could not escape from his grip and thrashed around as if it was in pain. Jinwoo gritted his teeth and strengthened his arms even more. Slam. Boom. Jinwoo's body slammed against the walls and on the floor, but he never released his arms. If I didn't raise my levels as high as I could before coming here, there was literally no end to wondering about what ifs and what could have beens. However, all kinds of thoughts still swirled in Jinwoo's head. If he didn't raise his level to the limit, if his strength stat wasn't so illogically high, then he'd have gone through incredible hell in order to kill the Kasaka. No, he might even have died here. So, his decision not to come down right away proved to be the smart one. His choice was indeed the right one. Crack, a accompanied by a rather awful noise. The skull of Kasaka gave in and cracked apart. As expected of a boss mob, his level rose up by 2 after killing the Kasaka. Jinwoo tightly clenched his fists.